Okay, so welcome to this lecture. I was addressing a question about the d-infinity slope and the d-infinity flow direction, and I'm assuming this comes out of this exercise. Was in the hand calculations or the in the GIS evaluation of it. So verifying using GIS. So there it's created the project. Zoom to the layer. It does so here's when we use this slope function, we evaluating the derivative slope. Then we use okay, we're using aspect. So then we get to the hydrology flow direction, and you can run that tool, and you input the elevation, you output a flow direction raster, and then you output a drop raster. That percentage drop raster is the slope in a percentage drop, and that's for D8. And for d-infinity, we should have something similar. So if I have a right, so percent drop d-infinity, that will be the the flow d-inf is the d-infinity flow direction. The percent drop d-infinity is the d-infinity slope. And I think I was looking for you to just record those values at the cells A and B and put them in the table. Okay, so go and look carefully at what it says on page, whatever this is, 9, 10. So the turn is slope aspect, hydrologic slope and flow direction, grid cells A and B, both D8 and D-infinity. So there was also a question about, and somebody had, I think, an email or text message about the diagrams. So here I'm thinking of just a sketch, so probably a hand sketch, and if you want to hand it in on the computer, take a picture of it with your phone or scan it or something like that, where you draw a diagram that maybe if you're illustrating a vertical slope, you might have a horizontal line and a line down there and sort of draw the angle sign and say this is the angle. If you're showing the direction, show the reference, which might be either north and clockwise from north or east and counterclockwise from east, and draw it around for however many degrees the difference is, and put an arrow saying this is the direction of the downhill slope. And that should be explaining what that number means, and it should make sense when you look at that and the elevation values on the little grid that you're looking at. If you've got an arrow pointing down in one direction and you look at the grid cells and see, well, the steepest, the lowest one is really in a different direction, it means you've probably done something wrong. Are there any questions from anybody else in the class before I get started? Not hearing any. Let me switch to today's topic. So today I was going to effectively lead you through part of the watershed and stream network delineation exercise, and that will be using the TauDEM software. I'm not going to go through all of the bit at the beginning. I'm just going to sort of flip through that on the PDF assignment so that we can get to the interesting parts. But if you look at this, you'll see that I've got a little bit of writing about the purpose and the sort of similarity between TauDEM and ArcGIS. There's a possibility that some of you may have trouble installing TauDEM. I hope that's not the case. If you have a computer that's locked down and you're not an administrator on it, then that may be the case. Then to actually give you something to do, I've said you can go back to the similar exercise that I taught in the class last year with David Maidment, and just do the whole thing using ArcGIS. So, but what I'm going to cover today here is the TauDEM approach. For installing TauDEM, basically you download the software from that location, or if you click on this link, it should take you directly to the setup file that you download. You just double click on it. There's quite a number of other parts that it depends on it. It wants to install GDAL, which is a library used for reading grids, and it wants a Python location to put it. So I chose to put it in the ArcGIS Pro Python environment. I think it actually works if you skip that. This is only used for a few of the specialized functions. Then you have to click through installing a number of other message passing interface for the parallel processing. So just you sort of have to click yes to agree to the whatever the software terms are, because TauDEM is built using software that comes from other places. So then it has you create a map project, and it shows you how to add a toolbox. So what I've done is I've actually just opened Arc Pro, and here I've got an empty map project, and the way to get TauDEM into it is you go to the catalog pane and toolboxes. You're going to have to right click and say add a toolbox. Now mine defaults to the last location I went to, and I've obviously done this before, so it's going to C or computer C program files TauDEM, TauDEM5 Arc. You might actually on your computer have to click on the C and then wait while it navigates through, find program files. TauDEM is down here somewhere after you've installed TauDEM, and then there's TauDEM5 Arc, and then there's the TauDEM toolbox. So you click on that, then you'll see the TauDEM tools become added to your project. If you save your project, it'll come back when you reopen it again. But if you start a new project, you'll have to do that again. I haven't found out a way to get the tools that I'm distributed to be part of the regular geoprocessing library. There may be a way to do that. So there we have, that's how you get the TauDEM tools. Then there's quite a bit of writing here. Well, and you can see it expands and shows all the tools available. There's quite a lot of writing here about the location of the USGS gauge at the mouth of Logan Canyon, the latitude and longitude, and it's the fact that it's in the North American 27 datum, which comes from the website, and then putting that into a Excel file and calculating the latitude and longitude in decimal degrees, which is what you've done before. So I'm going to sort of skip over that. And then instructions for actually getting the data we'll work with from the national map. So this time, rather than using the Living Atlas, which is data managed by Esri, which I know some folks had trouble getting it because you have to, that's where it actually uses your ArcGIS online account. The national map data is all free. So there's guidance about searching for, well, zooming into this area, looking for the 1/3 arcsecond data from the 3DEP program, the 3-dimension elevation program, and then picking the two products that are the rasters that cover the Logan watershed. So there's one, the main one, the Logan watershed, and for the bit that extends up into Idaho, you need the other one above. So then you're going to actually have to combine the two together. Combining grids together, the magic word that you have to know about is mosaic. Who would have thought that mosaic is the word to use? But once you learn that the term given for combining grids is mosaic, then you can find the mosaic tool and you're off and running. If you just are floundering around looking for a word like combine or patch together or something, it can actually be quite hard to find. So you sort of half the battle is learning the jargon. So there's guidance here on adding those two grids, unzipping them, using the mosaic tool. You get a very large digital elevation model. We could have worked with this large digital elevation model, but running some of the steps would take 3 or 4 minutes, and I thought that would be kind of tedious. And plus, if you've done something wrong and you have to do it again, so for learning, it's much better to work with a smaller DEM. So there's I go through the steps of importing the Logan River watershed feature class from the exercise last time, and effectively clipping the digital elevation model just to the, well, I put a 1 kilometer buffer around the edge to avoid edge contamination. And then we clip the DEM and we end up with a DEM just of the smaller area and work with that. So I'm going to sort of pick up the exercise from there. And the first thing I'm going to do is just add to my map that Logan digital elevation model. So let me go to where I've just created this project, watershed delineation exercise, and I'm going to copy the Logan TIFF as well as the Logan gauges CSV. That was the outlets file. I'm going to put those inside that watershed delineation exercise. So now this folder just has those two files as well as the default files that it set up when I created the project. So let me add some data. So on my map, I can add the data, and there I can add Logan TIFF. I'm not going to bother with pyramids. I never know whether to bother with them or not. And I probably should check one of those default buttons so that it doesn't ask me the question every time. So right now it's loading that data, and it's certainly taking its time over it. I'm not sure. Did I actually click load? Yes. So it's loaded this digital elevation model. I can also add the CSV file that's going to be my outlet location, and that well, that's just a table. So let me, rather than getting ahead of myself, go and see where we are in the exercise. So I'm basically starting on page 12. On page 12, there's towards the top, it says to turn in the number of rows and columns in the Logan TIFF and the full DEM. So I haven't loaded the full DEM here, so we won't actually see the answer. But I can look at the properties of this digital elevation model. And if I go to source here and look at raster information, I see it's 3,697 columns, 4,363 rows. So those will be two of the entries. When you look at the full DEM after you've mosaiced the two together, you'll see it's a whole lot bigger. You also see this quite interesting cell size, 9.259 times 10 to the minus 5. So the units on that are actually degrees, and that's because if I go further down here to spatial reference, you'll see that this is a geographic coordinate system. So this is a digital elevation model that has not been projected. So one of the things that we programmed into TauDEM was the ability to work with geographic data directly rather than having to project it, recognizing that projection sometimes introduces distortions. So it's going to be doing the calculations, assuming a spheroid without doing any projection. The sort of side effect of that is I'm going to be looking at a map that's geographic coordinates. So it looks, if you're familiar with this area, it looks fatter than it should be. The Bear Lake is really sort of longer and thinner than that. And we could change the properties here to, for example, use rather than a geographic coordinate system, we could use a different coordinate system. We could use the sort of WGS84 web Mercator, which is what web mapping systems use. Or we could, for example, go to UTM, and you might remember from earlier that we were in zone 12. So if we click on that, now you'll see the Bear Lake looks a little bit thinner, and the map, the DEM is longer and skinnier. In all of the screenshots that I've got in the exercise, I left it in geographic coordinates, but I'll switch to that. And that's not actually changed any of the data. That's just the way it's viewed. The data is still in geographic coordinates. It does ask you there to work out what the cell size is in meters from that number 9.259 times 10 to the minus 5. And to do that, it says to go to the lecture that we gave, which I believe was the third class, no, the very first class, perhaps. If we look at the slides on, I think I maybe even told you which slides to look at, 66 and 67. So we find that this is where it shows how you can calculate the length on a meridian and the length on a parallel. R will be what you use for the radius of the Earth, and I suggested use 6,370 kilometers because that's what's given on the slide, and that's a pretty good approximation. For the length on the meridian, the north-south direction, you just take that radius and multiply it by the angle, the delta phi. Now that 9.259 times 10 to the minus 5 is degrees. You're going to have to convert that to radian. So multiply by pi, divide by 180, multiply by the radius, and then you'll get a length that's in kilometers. You'll have to divide it by 1,000, multiply by 1,000 to get a length in meters. You should get something on the order of 10. I think it's 9.8 or something like that. Then in the east-west, do the same thing, but use this formula that includes the cosine of the latitude, and you should get something like about 7 meters. So you'll find that each cell is about 9 meters tall, about 7 meters wide. So you can work out what the area of those are at this particular latitude. So when you are later on, when we're working out the area of our watershed, we're going to have to recognize those cell sizes. So there's a bit of connecting of this back to the first lecture in what you have to turn in here. So then it has, we want to add to our map the gauge location, and I'm going to do that by using the display XY data function, which opens the XY table to point geoprocessing tool. And this is a little bit subtle too, which is why I wanted to go through it. You remember when I showed you the screenshot from the USGS website, it said NAD 27. So that means the latitude and longitude in this table is with respect to the North American datum of 1927. So we have to put the coordinate system here to be that. So we go into coordinate systems for North America, USA and territories, and there is NAD 27. Click on that, and it shows GCS North America 1927. So sometimes the sort of short name you get in the windows and the longer name that you get here doesn't exactly match up, and you should sort of start learning those associations. GCS North America 1927 means the same thing as NAD 1927. I also have to make sure I get these fields right. So the X field should be the longitude in decimal degrees, the Y field longitude in decimal degrees, and I now run this, and with a bit of luck, I should get a dot on my map. That's a very dark colored dot, and it should show up near the outlet. So if I didn't show up anywhere near the outlet, what did I do wrong? It didn't show up anywhere. Well, I said X field longitude, the Y field should be the latitude, and I put longitude. So that was kind of a little bit silly. So it was off in Never Living Land somewhere. And I also forgot to change the name of my output feature class. So I'm going to put that in the Watershed Delineation Exercise Geodatabase, and I'm just going to call it Logan Gauge NAD 27 to remind myself that that's the projection it's in. Okay, getting the inputs right usually helps. So now there the dot showed up. So let me remove this previous erroneous dot, and let's recolor this dot that I got, a color that I can actually see. So something like that. So there is the outlet, and this is the Logan River drainage that we'll be working with. But I guess when we were looking at this digital elevation model, we noticed that we may not have noticed, but now that I'm drawing your attention to it, I said that we looked at the spatial reference, and we saw that the coordinate system was with respect to North American datum of 1983, and this is where the units were given in degrees, so that's how we knew that the 9.259 was degrees. This is a different coordinate system. There's a difference between the North American datum of 1927 and 1983, so we actually have to convert from the one to the other, else our results are not going to be quite precise, and we like precise results. The difference is not that big, but if we've been careful about our work, we should do that projection. So that's going to be done in geoprocessing with a project tool. And so I'm going to input my feature class as the Logan Gauge NAD 27. I'm going to output the data set as now I'm also going to use this conversion to save the output as a shapefile outside of a geodatabase, because there's a couple of limitations of TauDEM, being that I'm using sort of public libraries for reading and writing rasters. I can't read into the Esri geodatabases, which are a proprietary format. At least the library that I'm using doesn't do that. So I need the values to be in a shapefile outside of the geodatabase. That's also why I was working with the digital elevation model as a TIFF file outside of the geodatabase. So I'm going to tell the location where I want this work to go to be just in the Watershed Delineation folder, and I'm going to name it, what did I just called it Logan Gauge.shp. So by putting the .shp, it saves it as a shapefile, and the output coordinate system, I can just choose it to be the same as Logan.tiff, and it'll work it out as the geographic coordinate system for North America 1983. So once you've got a couple of layers with different coordinate systems in your map, it's convenient that you can just pick one of them to pick the coordinate systems from them. And it tells you that it's using this NADCON conversion to go from the one to the other. You don't have to worry too much about that. So we run it, and we get a dot that, as far as the map's concerned, it appears in the same place because it is actually the same geographic place. It's just that underlying, if you went into those shapefiles and told it to display the X and Y coordinates, you'd see that they are slightly different. So I'm going to remove the NAD27 one from my map, just so I don't get confused. So there's a bit of a write-up about that coordinate system on page 13. So now I'm at a point where I can actually start using TauDEM to do the work of watershed delineation that I was talking about on Tuesday. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to where my TauDEM tools are, expand them, expand the basic grid group, and filling the pits. So there's a pit remove function, so I can double click on it, and it's just like the regular geoprocessing functions we worked as before. It opens up in the geoprocessing pane, and I can select logan.tif as my inputs. One of the things that TauDEM does is when you pick the first input, it then tries to fill in the rest with default names. And there's a naming convention that's used. There's a suffix FEL that's put for the filled elevation value. And I've got a link in the exercise on page 15 that takes you to all of those, the explanation of those naming conventions. And I would suggest, I mean, you don't have to do that. You could put whatever name you like here. But I would suggest you use that naming convention, because then whenever you look at the file, you know what it is. I mean, the computer will just do whatever you tell it to do with whatever file you give it, and it'll give you an error if it can't do whatever it is you're telling it to do. But for you to keep track of, oh, this is the original digital elevation model, this is the pit-filled one, these are the flow directions, these are the slopes, it's useful to have that be part of the name. So that's why that set of suffixes has been developed. So I'm going to click Run. So now we're running TauDEM. One of the things it does is it pops up that little command box, because it's actually what it actually is there's a little Python program that runs that interprets these inputs, and it sends it to a command. It sends it to an executable program that's run from the command shell. And that way, TauDEM can be independent of ArcGIS. And if you don't have ArcGIS, you can still run the functions on your data, but from the command line, you don't get the fancy sort of dialog box to populate the inputs. So we see that we got a filled elevation raster added here, and it's pretty hard to see any differences. If I flip back and forth between that, it might get a little bit lighter and darker, but the subtlety, there's any subtleties or differences are hard to see. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take the difference and examine that a little bit. Before doing that, one of the inputs here is the number of processes. TauDEM is doing its work using parallel processing. And if you look at page 15 here, there's a little bit of a graphic that, I guess page 16, that says how it works. It basically divides the domain into stripes. And here there's 3 stripes iterated, but you can choose however many. Each process, and if you've got a multi-core computer, depending on how fancy it is, you might have 2 cores or 4 cores or 8 cores or 16 cores if you've shelled out the big bucks. It can set one of those processes off to work on part of the domain, and it'll do its work on part of the domain as much as it can get done. Then when each of them gets done, it sort of swaps information to exchange across the boundaries and then continues, because information does need to pass across the boundaries. So that's how it's kind of like dividing up the work amongst 8 students and saying, you work on this part, you work on that part, you work on that part. When you get stuck, share information. Or when you need information from your neighbor, wait and then swap the information, and then go again, and hopefully it'll get done more quickly. So that's one of the things that we've done to try and speed things up. There's a bit of an explanation of that there, but not a lot. We've got papers on that if you want to know about it. So because it's hard to see what pit filling actually did, what I'm going to do is take a little bit of a sidestep into seeing what's going on, and I'm going to look at the raster calculator. So find the raster calculator tool, and I'm going to do the difference, the filled elevations minus the original elevations, and I'm just going to name my result difference, diff.tiff, and I'm putting all the results now as separate files outside of my geodatabase, so it's not quite as tidy as on your file system, and I'm going to run it. So now it's calculating the difference between those two rasters, and we see that it's actually got values that range from 0 up to 62. So it's found some pits that are 62 meters big, and that seems pretty dramatic if we are filling things up. So you might be asking yourself, what's going on? Let me symbolize this a little bit differently. So I'm going to go to a classified color scheme, pick something that goes from dark blue to light blue, and then let me reorder the colors so that the light blue is the small values, the dark blue is the big values, and let's make the lightest value of all transparent. So now you can see these are where the large sinks are. So we can say zoom in on it, and let's look at the contours of this digital elevation model to get a sense of what's going on. So I'm going to go to the contour tool, Spatial Analyst, and I'm going to do that on my original DEM, and my output feature class, I'm going to put in my geodatabase, and I'm going to call it contour 20 meters. I'm going to use a 20-meter contour interval. So contour interval 20. And then I'm going to run that. So soon we should get our contours appear. So there you have the contours, and let me turn off these other layers. So you can see that there are closed contours around about this area where we were getting this large filling of the pits. And that's actually a real internal draining depression known as Peter's sinks. So if you turn off that color, you'll see it's labeled as Peter's sinks, and that's there's a lot of karst topography. The water really drains in and it just seeps into the ground because of limestone crevices and caves and the like. So that we don't have a Swiss cheese like looking watershed or an American cheese like looking watershed, we are going to fill the sinks anyway to be able to work with it. I've got a little bit in the exercise about Peter sinks because this is actually a location, because it's internally draining, all of the cold air accumulates right at the bottom, and that's where they've recorded record low temperatures of something like minus 46 degrees Fahrenheit. So you don't want to be up there in the dead of winter because it will be really, really cold. And sometimes then you can get the wind come through and clear out that sort of internally drained cold air, and you get a big change in a matter of hours. So I've asked you to turn in a layout that just sort of illustrates this and figures out what the largest, the depth of the deepest sink is.
I have a question. This is Lindsay at USU. So we would fill those sinks before doing the delineation?
Yes.
Even though they're real. Otherwise, well, if we chose not to fill them, then we would end up with this as a hole in our watershed, which you might say is more correct, because certainly overland flow falling in here is going to go inside here and it's not going to drain out to the river. But once you get to subsurface, the water is seeping in here, and at a large scale, it's coming out in Logan River anyway, because that's what's actually responsible for a lot of the springs that are along Logan River. And we've got some folks at the Water Lab doing research to try and figure out where that goes, and there have been some interesting geology trace studies that have looked at that. Isn't your work somehow related to some of that? So Connor's, yeah. So he's trying to model a snowmelt going into these areas. But if it's that cold, the snow's never. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to sort of step through the sort of recipe of what we're doing. I should just point out there is a little bit on page 14 and 15 that sort of tells you the big picture. So we're going to first fill pits, calculate D8 flow direction and slope, calculate the contributing area that then allows you to identify, you can start identifying the connectivity in the watershed, define a preliminary stream raster. We'll notice that our gauge that we mapped is not precisely on that, because at the scale of the grid cells we're working with, 10 meters, the location of the gauge might be off to the side of the river or not exactly on it. So then we adjust the outlet to be located on that raster. Then we do the recompute of the contributing area upstream of the outlet, evaluate a stream raster using the objective stream drop test that I spoke about in last class, calculate stream reaches and subwatersheds, and then convert those subwatersheds to polygons. So that's the sort of general plan of where we're going. And the result would be a comprehensive set of information about the hydrology of this watershed. So we're starting from a fairly simple data set and going to end up with a very rich set of data structures. So let me go back to the next TauDEM function. We've already done pit remove, so we're going to calculate D8 flow directions. So again, I can input Logan FEL, and it chooses P. I use the subject P for flow directions. I was thinking of it as pointers. This is the pointer from one grid cell to the next, which is where the P came from. And SD8 is the D8 slope. So we run that. So this is possibly the longest running of the tools that we'll run. And it says it took 3 minutes on the computer that I developed it on, but my laptop is a little bit faster than that. So it's going to, well, it's now actually done the TauDEM part. And as soon as that black screen goes away, the TauDEM part's done. It was just importing it into ArcGIS. So we see we got a raster of slopes, which, let me turn the contours off and zoom out. You can see there's, wherever there's sort of cliffs and steep areas, it's got the light slope, and down at the flat, slow slope. And I could put a different symbology on that. There's also the flow directions, which give you this interesting looking, this almost looks like a hill shade, and that's because it's encoded 1 through 8 with 1 to east, and then it sort of goes round. So that's similar to the hill shading. If we change the symbology on that, to say be unique values, and then it's going to show the values 1 through 8 with the color scheme that shows that, and that's more typical for depicting that. And you can zoom in on the individual values, and if you click on one of these, say, yellow ones, you'll find that that's a value of 2, which means, if you remember the convention, I think was 1, 2, that's flowing to the northeast. So the next thing after flow directions is contributing area. So I'm going to use D8 contributing area, and I'm going to input the flow direction grid, and it's going to just go with Logan 88 contributing area grid. And there's an option if we want to do weighted contributing area. We're not going to do that. We'll also input the outlets once we've actually located the outlets on the streams. So run that. This function actually is very quick. And now it's done. The range of numbers from contributing area is huge. It's from it's a count of the number of grid cells. So it's from 1 grid cell up to 7 million grid cells. So the largest locations in this watershed, 7 million grid cells flow through them. So when we look at it on just a sort of continuum scale, it's not all that interesting to look at, but somewhere down here is where the 7 million will be. You'll notice also that this outlet point is not exactly on it. And if you go to the edge, you'll see this sort of raggedy looking parts. And on some of the edges, it'll be even worse than that. And that's the edge contamination I was talking about. So if I look over here, for example, you can see these are streaks coming in. So here, if we were interested in this part of the watershed down in this bottom right corner, we would have a problem because we've got parts of the area here that drain into our domain. So contributing area cannot be evaluated. Fortunately for the Logan watershed, well, not fortunately, it's because we used the 1 kilometer buffer, we don't have any edge contamination in the part of this that we're interested in. So, but this is much better to interpret if you have a different symbology. So I'm going to change that and go with a classified symbology, and I like to go with a sort of a blue from light to dark, with the light colors being the low values. So reverse the ordering by clicking. So I'm reversing the ordering by sort of right clicking on the top here, and then I put in a sort of a multiplicative scale. So typically something like 300. So everything with the contributing area less than 300 grid cells will be the lightest blue, then roughly multiply by 3. So 1,000, roughly multiply by 3, 3,000, roughly multiply by 3, 10,000, and then just leave the highest value at what it is. And so now if you zoom in, you can sort of start to see some of the connectivity in the watershed. So we could, for example, see, let's look at this grid cell, and there's a value of 7,040,000 and so from that one there. If I step back, it's 7,037,000, so quite a big difference, and that's because this part coming from the side is about 2,800. So you should be able to find that that value is probably that value plus that value, which means this grid cell is flowing there. And if we click on this grid cell, we should see the flow direction on, well, Logan P for that grid cell is a value of 4, and our flow directions are 1, 2, 3, 4. So diagonally from the center up to the top left to the northwest is where the flow direction 4 is. So clicking around here, who's going to tell me which direction this grid cell goes? Where my little hand is. Can you guys on the phone see where the hand is? I'm expecting an answer from cyberspace for this one. So what's the flow direction for that grid cell? So we're getting an answer from in the room, they're saying 3. So why 3?
So is
it's going to the
direction,
north.
yeah.
So this is the direction 3. So we click on there and for sure it's 3. What about this cell here? What will be the flow direction for that? Anybody from cyberspace want to guess that? Not guess, work it out. Maybe I should pull this up and see if anybody's put a chat, put the answer in chat perhaps. Okay. So Colin, you can tell me an answer.
No, I'm actually behind. I'm still dealing with getting the DEM in.
Okay, well, just look at my screen.
So it's
what's the flow
3.
direction of the, what's the flow direction associated with this one here?
Have you already pressed identify on that one?
I haven't pressed identify yet. So
Okay.
Or Eduardo, Emma, somebody out there.
Is it 5? This is Marissa.
Yes, it's 5 because it's going to the left, and the numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we click there, we should get confirmation if the direction is 5. So you get a sense of the sort of connectivity by looking at this flow accumulation raster here. And we can also look and see that, well, we see that the high values are along where there's streams, and this location where we map the gauge is a little bit off the stream. So if we're going to be honing in on this gauge, we actually want to move this to the outlet. There's another interesting observation here. Why are these cells not square?
Of the coordinate system?
Yes, because of the coordinate system. So this was a geographic coordinate system where the east-west and the north-south linear length is different. The degrees length is the same, and that's what you worked out. I said it's roughly 10 meters north-south. It's roughly 7 meters east-west, and you guys are going to work out the exact answers based on the formulas that I showed. So the first thing we're going to do, or the next thing we're going to do is, well, I guess I've asked you to report the contributing area draining to a cell near the outlet in number of cells. So here's the outlet that I've zoomed in on. A cell near it, pick that one or that one, doesn't really matter which. So if I pick that one, for example, I'm going to get 7,050,585 grid cells. That's the number of cells. You would have worked out the 7 meters and 10 meters more precisely. Therefore, you'll know what the area is in square meters. You can multiply that and you'll get the contributing area in square meters, divide by 1,000,000 to get it in square kilometers, do the conversion to square miles, you know that there's 1.6 kilometers in a mile, and compare that to the drainage area reported by the USGS for that gauge and see, hopefully you're close. If you're not close, then probably you've done something wrong. So that's one of the things that you should be turning in on page 21. So the simplest way of mapping streams is just to apply a threshold to this contributing area. So there's a handy tool for doing that, named, guess what, stream definition by threshold. So let's open that, and it says input the accumulated stream source grid. That's the contributing area grid. You can have a mask if you only want to work on part of your area. You can put your threshold. Now I'm going to actually put the threshold as 30,000 rather than 100, and I'm going to, the output will be output stream raster. I'm going to change the name of that to be, I'm going to call it Logan Prelim for the preliminary stream raster. So it's now given me a 0-1 raster that's effectively mapped the streams, and that was somewhat of an overkill because all I wanted was basically a target stream that I can slide this grid cell downhill till it hits the outlet. And there's a tool, move outlets to streams, that we use for that. So it's going to move it down along the D8 flow directions. The input stream raster has to be the Logan Prelim source. The outlets have to be the Logan gauge that we had, and the output file is just going to name itself Logan outlet move.shape. So and it says it's not going to move it more than 50 grid cells, and I'm going to run that. And sometimes it doesn't add results to the map. In fact, it never seems to be adding shapefiles. It used to in the old ArcGIS map, but in ArcGIS Pro, for some reason, shapefiles don't get added. And not having taken the time to figure out why we have to add it manually. So there is the moved outlet. So it's curious that it actually moved it to a location. Let's change the symbology a little bit. It moved it to a location that is sort of off to the, up to the left a little bit. So what it did was it took this grid cell and it rolled it downhill until it hit the stream. So we could actually go and, if we looked at the flow directions associated with it, so getting rid of that, well, let's look at the flow direction there. It's a value of 3, which is to the north. So then it's probably gone up here to this grid cell. That's a value of 4, which is off to there. So it's gone up here somewhere. A value of 5, maybe a value of 4. It took some circuitous route to get there, and we might learn a little bit about, if we look at the contours, we might. Well, we're in a pretty flat part of the terrain, and somehow it's routed this to get it to there. So that's the process of effectively moving it onto the stream. You could have just edited the shapefile and moved it, but if you had 500 outlets, we're working a large area, you want a tool to be able to do it. So that's why we had the tool. With only one, it's a bit of overkill. And if you're running a national water model, you've got many more than one outlet. Once the outlet's positioned on the stream, now we can actually isolate the area we want to work with just to be upstream of that outlet. And I'm going to go back and run the D8 contributing area function again. So notice for getting to these functions, I can't actually go into my geoprocessing and do the standard approach. I can't say, for example, D8. Oh, maybe I can. Interesting. I thought it didn't. D8 contributing area, it's finding it. So there's been improvements. It used to not work like that. So I can actually use the geoprocessing and I find the TauDEM tools and put the logo and flow direction. Now I'm going to specify the outlet. I want the moved outlet. And I use a convention of putting an O following the AD8 if it's upstream of an outlet. Anything that'll help you remember what that file name is. So if I do that calculation, we then get a result. So let's zoom to the layer. You'll see, let's turn the contours off. It's isolated on my watershed. It's only calculated the contributing area upstream of that point. So that's really useful. And we're going to be basically working with the properties of this watershed, not interested in the rest of it, because at least some of the rest of it was edge contaminated. But within this area is not. So we might want to symbolize this similar to our other contributing area. So go with a classify approach, the kind of blue color scheme, the dark values at the bottom, and rough multiples of 300, 1,000, 3,000, 10,000. And another nicety that I like to use in visualizing sometimes is to make the lowest color no color at all. So if I turn off, so now I can zoom in and see here I've got my flow directions are starting to look like streams. There's as you get to the larger contributing area values, you're getting down into the sort of stream network area, and towards the outlets, you can get a sense of. So the digital elevation model has actually mapped the stream going along here, and it stopped where I had the outlet. The stream gauge actually shows is there, and the contours on the topo map show a little bit of an offset. So there's not perfect alignment between the DEMs and the various sources of information, at least in this base map here. So now we want to go through the process of defining streams objectively. In the lecture last time, I went through quite a bit of talking about the Purker-Douglas approach, using the stream drops and the t-test on the difference between means to objectively pick the threshold. We coded that all up, so you don't have to worry about it. You can just go to Purker-Douglas stream definition, but you do have to get the inputs right. And it's good to know what's going on to sort of check the theory. But you can choose the input elevation grid, and it'll fill out many of the things, so many of the parameters involved in that. We want to specify our outlet to be the moved outlet shapefile, and rather than, there's an option to put in my accumulation threshold, or I can use a range below to do it automatically. So I'm going to do the range below. And the first time I did this, it didn't work because it told me that there was no significant, or there was always a significant difference because the 500 is too small. So to save time, I'm going to immediately go to 1,000, and rather than 10 breaks, we're going to go to 15 breaks. But if you get that the method's not working, and you can see from the sort of the results you're getting that this range is not big enough, you can make it bigger. So now I'm going to run this tool, and it does a bunch of things. So you'll see the black screen flash a few times because it's doing the calculation of the Puker-Douglas curvature, then the accumulation of that, then the stream drop test. Here it's doing the stream drop test, and it's printing out the t values, and the last column is the t-test value, trying a bunch of other thresholds. Then once it picked the optimal threshold, it's now mapping the stream raster and calculating stream orders. You'll notice some of the outputs there. There was a Logan SRC, which was the stream raster, and there was a stream order. There might have been a stream order output as well. So now it's done. So let's look a little bit at what we've got. So first turn the stream raster off and this one off. And there's this grid called Logan SS. And it kind of looks like a stream network, but it's got a bunch of disconnectedness to it. And this is the Puker-Douglas approach for mapping streams that just really identifies those valley grid cells using that filtering algorithm that I described. So it gives you an objective way to identify the streams, and notice there's a great difference between what's going on in the hillsides and what's going on in the city streets, where we're actually starting to identify city streets. But to get this to be all connected, we should do a weighted contributing area calculation. So the weighted contributing area calculation result was this SSA. So this stands for stream sources and stream sources accumulated. So if we turn that on and turn that off, we get something that looks a little bit like flow accumulation, except the values are a whole lot less, and that's because it's only counting those connected grid cells. Then it tried a bunch of thresholds on that, and you can actually click on the view details to see what this tool produced. And in all of the output that scrolled by, you'll see part of the output was this this table. It was trying a threshold value of 5, 7, 10. So it tried threshold values from 5 up to 1,000, and it came up with 15 logarithmically distributed points in there. And the last column is the t value. And these values are huge, meaning the differences are significant, but you get to a point here where there's this -3 for a threshold of 400, -1.7 for a threshold of 684. So that's where you get the break from being statistically significant to not statistically significant, and it picks the threshold of 684. That's bigger than the 500 that we ran with first. If we'd originally run with 500, you would have got all of these t values greater than 2 in absolute value, and you just get a black screen, because then it defaults back to 0 and it maps the whole thing as stream. So if that happens the first time, then you sort of adjust your parameters. So it chose that threshold of 600, and that's how it mapped streams with this stream raster grid. So that's given you a mapping of the streams in the Logan River watershed, and it didn't, well, it chose the threshold for you automatically. And it's saying that this could be an objective way to come up with the drainage density for the streams in the Logan River. So, but right now, this is just a set of grid cells. This is a bunch of zeros and ones. If we want to get this into a stream network, we need a tool that's going to basically segment these wherever these junctions and come up with unique identifiers and construct a shapefile for that. So the tool that does that is Stream Reach and Watershed. So that we can again put the pit-fill digital elevation raster there. So it fills in all of these other ones by default. And I can run it. What we've got is this Logan W raster was loaded. So I'm going to zoom to it as a layer, and I'm going to symbolize it and use a unique values color scheme. It says do I want to compute unique values? Yes. And pick a color scheme that I like. Kind of got partial to the light pastels for watersheds. So those are the individual sub-watersheds draining to each stream reach. One of the other outputs was the shapefile. So I'm going to add that. That's logannet.shape. It didn't get added because of the fact that the shapefiles that are written are not added. So I add that, and there you can see a series of lines that represent the individual shape. So now I've constructed myself a shapefile. These are vector lines. I can look at them individually. I could symbolize them with unique identifiers, and that's what I did in making one of the slides that I showed you last time. I could symbolize it. Well, there's a lot of attributes associated with that. So okay, the pop-up is down here. It's showing me there's a link number, there's a downstream one, upstream one. So let's look at, zoom right in. If I click on this one, the link number is 186, 139 is downstream. If I click down there, I should find that little short one is 139, and 186 is one of the upstream ones. So it's providing the downstream, upstream connectivity so you can trace down and trace up, and you've got connectivity in this network. If you pick a source stream, you'll see that the upstream links are -1, indicating that that was the no data encoding. So the attribute table of this shapefile has provided a lot of information here. There's also things like the distance to the outlet. So that'll be the distance from the end of this all the way down to the outlet. So if we go up to the top headwaters, we can get the length of the main stream, and that's one of the things I'm actually asking you to report. You've also got the length of each reach. So if we look at this as an attribute table, there's the length in meters, and you could, for example, calculate statistics on that, and that'll give you the total, well, the sum of the lengths, 3 354,000 meters in this case. So that's, if you then divide by the area, you'll get a measure of drainage density. So I've actually asked you to report things like the drainage density involved with this. So you've got quite a lot of rich information out of that. So that was I guess in the assignment I went and symbolized this with unique values. So we could go, rather than single symbol there, we could also go with unique values. Maybe we have a sort of a darker color scheme because it's stream reaches. We actually have to go to add all of the values involved, and wants to make sure I really want to do it with more than 100 of them. And so now I've got each of these unique values symbolized with a different color, if that's what you want to do. And you could actually even go and label them, and you get the link numbers associated with them. So I did on page 31. Okay, before we do that, there's one last thing, is to convert these sub-watersheds here are still rasters. So this is a Logan raster where there's a grid value of 12. That should actually correspond to the, well, I guess I clicked in a different place, but this is a link number 35, and I click in the corresponding watershed, I get a grid value of 35. So there's a watershed to stream connectivity there. But the last thing of getting it, in terms of getting vector data, is to convert the watershed grid to a shapefile. And so we input the watershed grid, which is Logan W, output the shapefile. So I'm just going to store it in the folder where we're putting this stuff, and Logan W dot shape, and you end up with a shapefile. So there's the polygons associated with each stream reach, and the grid code is the value that it inherited from the grid that it got. So I do ask you to take a bit of time to examine Spawn Creek, and I've got some information in the map that shows where Spawn Creek is, and who knows where Spawn Creek is. I think it's this part of the watershed here. So this little stream, those ones there. So you can actually go to the select menu and select those streams. If I open the attribute table of the Logan Stream Network, you'll see there's 5 stream segments that make up Spawn Creek. So I wanted you to make a table that effectively explains the connectivity, explains that link number 5 has downstream link number 173, link number 29 has downstream link number 173. So we should see link number 5 has downstream link number 173, 173 has downstream 181, and 5 and 29 upstream of it. So there's 5 and 29 and 173. So make a table where you look at all of those, report the contributing area, and do that just for these 5 links to get an understanding of how all of this is connected together. Then I've been thinking that a lot of these exercises we've been working in a very directed sense. I've said, just do this, just do this. I tried at the beginning, say, okay, well, this is where we're going. But I think now that by now you should have the idea of mostly how these tools work. I think probably you are familiar with using these tools. So the next two parts of the exercise, I said some independent, less directed work. And I said, just calculate wetness index. So I just named the tools. Use the d-infinity flow directions, d-infinity contributing area, topographic wetness index tools to evaluate the topographic wetness index for the Logan River watershed. So we've got these tools here, and you can calculate d-infinity flow directions, figure out what the inputs are based on what you read there without being shown exactly what it is, run the tool, and get the topographic wetness index after running this tool and a couple of the other ones, and then turn in a layout illustrating that, and then also do the same for height above nearest drainage and turn in a layout for that. So I've sort of left those to be sort of less specific assignments. So that's what the plan is for this exercise. I haven't in Canvas yet put this as an assignment. I just put it on the page. I forgot that I actually had to put it in two places rather than just one, and maybe I should have organized it so that I only put things in one place. But it'll be an assignment that's due a week from today. Are there any questions? Any questions from those of you in cyberspace?
I have a question. This is Lindsay at USU. Does TauDEM calculate stream order for the individual reaches?
Yes, it does. So you'll see that there is a stream order column. So you might choose to symbolize in one of your layouts stream order as you could easily use it to make the width or put a different color, however. Because it has to calculate, it's doing the stream drop approach, which is on the ordered Strahler streams.
I have another question. It's me again.
Go ahead.
So I've used this online tool called Stream Stats before.
Right.
Is this the same type of software that drives that?
Yes. So it's Stream Stats is using ArcGIS functions sort of behind the scenes, and when you click on one of the points, it's actually got a stream raster built into it, and you actually before Stream Stats will work for you, you have to zoom in close enough until you can see those, and then you know where to click. That's exactly like placing an outlet on the stream. Then it'll delineate the watershed. It'll get things like the slope and the contributing area, feed those into the regression functions that the USGS has established to do things like calculate the different return period flows. So when I've been teaching undergraduate hydrology, and I want students to be able to delineate watersheds, but I don't want to have them use ArcGIS because it's kind of a heavy lift. You can just take them to Stream Stats, and that's pretty convenient. Any other questions?
I have a question. This is Marissa from Indiana. I'm going to apologize. There may be some background noise. I'm at the airport. But when so the computer that I normally use, I don't have administrative control over to download the TauDEM files. Would it work if I downloaded all of the TauDEM files onto my laptop and then just copied the folder into another folder on my other computer to get the toolbox? Would the tools still work, or do they need all of those other connections that you get when you download them?
I think it's going to need all of the other connections because it uses Python and MPI. So maybe you want to get ArcGIS on your laptop.
Okay.
That might be the easier approach. Unless your
Okay,
laptop
thank you.
is really underpowered.
Yeah, we'll see. That might be also an issue, but I'll try to figure it out.
So there is an option. You could actually, well, if you do the install of TauDEM on your laptop, TauDEM will work on your laptop. And you might have noticed when each TauDEM function is run, okay, if I view the details of this last one that I ran, it's giving to me it says there's a command line so if you don't have ArcGIS on your laptop, but you say have TauDEM on the laptop, you can still get the data onto your laptop and run it on the command line with that, and then transfer the results onto the computer that's got ArcGIS. So that'd be a kind of a tedious way to do it, but it would be one thing that you could do.
Can you explain how that works again? I'm not sure I understand exactly what that means.
If you install TauDEM on your laptop, then, but maybe you don't have ArcGIS on your laptop, you can't run the user interface GUI geoprocessing tools, but you can still go to a command line and type these or cut and paste these sort of strings, MPI exec, and you can run the various TauDEM functions. And there's actually a manual on the TauDEM help page that explains how to do that. But it's a fair bit more tedious. But if you want to run on a Linux computer, say a supercomputer or something like that, that's what you actually have to do.
Okay. And it probably wouldn't work if I was, like, I downloaded on one computer and then, because it like knows where the file locations are that they automatically download to, right? That's how it knows where they go, or?
Right. It knows where they go. Now it sets it in one of your system's path variables. So if you're comfortable editing your system's path variables, you can go and fiddle with that and get it to set up. So the setup script actually does all that for you, but if you want to build the pieces of it individually and you know your way around those sort of system things, you can do it.
Okay. Thank you.
So there was a text thing. What's the difference between contributing area and flow accumulation? So the way I'm using it, it's really just a different name. TauDEM used the term contributing area. ArcGIS uses the term flow accumulation, but they're really the same thing. The algorithms differ a little bit in that TauDEM counts the actual grid cell. Flow accumulation does not count the grid cell, so it's whether it's the total area flowing through and out of or flowing into, and that's the slight difference, but it's a difference of a value of 1. There was another question about, could you please explain a little bit about how to get the slope index? And I'm assuming that was meaning the topographic wetness index, because that's what we were asking for. So there is the d-infinity calculation that we just did that gave us slope and flow direction. The next thing we would do is we would calculate we would calculate the d-infinity contributing area. That would give me a specific catchment area grid. Then the wetness index is really the log of the specific catchment area divided by slope, which is actually what's evaluated by the specialized grid function topographic wetness index. So you would run that that function to get that. So, yeah. Okay, any other questions? So now, Jacob, are you on?
Yes.
So you wanted to ask me some questions to try and figure out what was going on with your thing. There's two choices for it. Either we can stay in this classroom and I'll answer it immediately, and after we've sort of excused everybody else, or folks are welcome to stay and see what the questions you have, or you can give me 15 minutes to shut things down and move over to my office and reconnect. Which is better for you?
Either would be fine. I actually realized that I'm going to have a problem. So I'm remote desktoping into two different computers in my lab. So one is because my processor at home isn't strong enough, so I remote desktop in to view the meeting and download the PowerPoints and whatnot. And then the other one is for running ArcPro. So I can't actually share my screen with you on the ArcPro screen. So I don't know how that could be worked around.
I could send you, well, you can't use GoToMeeting on the computer that's running ArcPro?
No, so that's, it doesn't let me view it in the browser for some reason. I don't know why that is. And then I also can't download the app because I don't have the clearance to do that.
Okay. So what are would it work for Webex? I've got a Webex connection. Or is there some way that you could share your screen with me, I guess, so that I can see what's going on?
I suppose I could try and turn on a webcam and turn it towards, I have two screens, so I could turn it towards the other screen.
Okay, that's
something we could figure that out when you get back to your office.
So why don't we do that? I'll shut down this here. I'll go back to my office and I'll get back on this GoToMeeting in about 15 minutes once I'm in my office.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else from anybody else? Okay. Well, then, thank you very much. And we're done for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.